Today, we need to talk about something incredibly heavy, but completely necessary. It's a global emergency that we often look past because the numbers feel too massive to wrap our heads around. Every single year, roughly 83,000 women and girls are intentionally killed worldwide. But here is the part that should make us all stop and think. 60% of those killings are committed by the people who are supposed to love them, their intimate partners or family members. That means an average of 137 women and girls are killed every single day by someone inside their own home, the very place where they are supposed to be safe. So, what exactly are we talking about when we use the word femicide? It isn't just another word for murder. From a legal and criminological perspective, femicide is the intentional killing of a woman or a girl, specifically because she is a woman. Unlike regular homicides, which might happen during a robbery or a street fight, femicide is deeply personal, and it's completely rooted in gender discrimination, unequal power dynamics, and misogyny. And look, when we talk about misogyny, it's not just some abstract, cartoonish hatred. Psychologically, it operates as a systemic enforcement mechanism. It forces traditional gender roles on women just to maintain male dominance and keep patriarchal structures alive. It shows up in everyday attitudes, in our institutions, and in relationships. It's that voice in society that hints women are inherently less capable, and it's the controlling behavior that tries to dictate a woman's choices, her autonomy, and how she expresses herself. Hey guys, welcome back to Crime Stories with Yvonne. Today, this isn't just a true crime story, this is an educational deep dive into the underlying criminology and psychology of the global femicide crisis. We are going to break down the behavioral mechanics so we can truly understand why this keeps happening, because to understand the anatomy of femicide, we have to look way past the headline numbers. Criminologists, forensic experts, and psychologists all agree. These aren't just isolated domestic disputes that suddenly got out of hand. This is a predictable, structural crisis. When you really study the criminology of this crime, you see exactly how the system breaks down and why perpetrators feel so safe doing what they do. And it starts with how we classify the offense. The UNODC and UN Women point out that if the legal system doesn't label these killings correctly from the start, the underlying gender motivation completely disappears from the records, making it impossible to build effective prevention policies. To understand the full scope from an analytical standpoint, experts break femicide into three main categories. First, you have intimate partner femicide killings by a husband, a boyfriend, or an ex. This is the most common type globally, and in criminological research, it is almost always the final step on a long timeline of coercive control. Second, there's family member femicide, where the killer is a relative like a father, a brother, or an uncle. This covers things like honor killings or dowry disputes, where a woman's life is treated like property. And finally, there's contextual or non-family femicide. These are gendered killings that happen outside the home, like sexual assault murders by strangers, the targeted killing of women human rights defenders, or trans femicide. But right now, the modern catalyst making this crisis even more dangerous is the digital world. Experts call it technology-facilitated gender-based violence, and the reality is that digital abuse doesn't stay online. It has become the primary staging ground for physical stalking and lethal violence. Think about digital coercive control. Psychologically, this is about total surveillance. Perpetrators are using spyware, tracking locations, and demanding shared cloud accounts to microregulate a partner's every move. They strip away her psychological privacy long before things ever get physical. In so many relationships today, checking texts, demanding passwords, and monitoring last seen status have become terrifyingly normal behavioral red flags. Then comes the actual campaign of terror. If a woman tries to leave, cyberstalking, leaking private images, and targeted online harassment are weaponized to completely break her psychological resolve, ruin her reputation, and isolate her from her support systems, essentially cutting off any safe way out. So, let's look at the actual criminological and psychological frameworks that explain why the cycle keeps repeating. Why do abusers feel so empowered, and why do our safety nets fail? First, from a criminological standpoint, we look at a modified version of routine activity theory. In classic criminology, A crime needs three things to happen simultaneously: a motivated criminal, a suitable target, and the absence of a capable guardian. In femicide cases, institutional silence is what removes that capable guardian. When the police dismiss a domestic violence call as a private family issue, or tell a woman to just go back home and make peace with her abuser, the state is removing the guardian. It sends a green light to the perpetrator, signaling to him that inside his house, he has total legal impunity. Now let's pivot to the psychology of the offender, specifically using the power assurance versus power control typology. Abusers rarely just snap or lose control. From a behavioral psychology perspective, it's actually the exact opposite. The murder is a desperate, pathological attempt to force control. Psychologists note that perpetrators often suffer from severe internal emotional dysregulation and an absolute inability to tolerate rejection or shame. The moment a woman challenges his authority, usually by threatening to end the relationship, the abuser hits a massive psychological crisis. To fix that perceived loss of power, he resorts to the ultimate act of violence to make that control permanent. And this brings us to the data deficit, the massive accountability gap that keeps all of this hidden in plain sight. Our systems are failing to track this in three major ways. First, misclassification. Police log these cases as generic murders because they don't bother to look at the history of domestic abuse. Second, we have invisible victims. Women from marginalized backgrounds like Indigenous women, migrants, or trans women are the least likely to be counted accurately in state crime ledgers. And third, all of this leads to policy blindness. Without real, honest data, governments don't allocate the funding needed for specialized domestic violence courts or high-security shelters. This systemic failure is the exact reason why that viral thought experiment took over social media recently. The man or bear debate. If you ask a woman if she'd rather be stuck in the woods with a random man or a random bear, millions of women choose the bear. A lot of men found that offensive or statistically ridiculous, but psychologically, the debate was never actually about wildlife survival. It was a profound sociological commentary on what it feels like to navigate the world as a woman. Look at predictability versus malice. A bear acts on pure animal instinct. If it attacks, it's defensive, it's protecting its cubs or its food. It doesn't act out of psychological cruelty or a desire to humiliate you. A strange man has free will, and he can be driven by a pathological need for power, sexual entitlement, or misogynistic rage. Then consider the worst-case scenario. As so many women pointed out online, the worst thing a bear can do is kill you. But women recognize the psychological reality that human predators are capable of prolonged torture, physical degradation, and sexual violence fates that feel a lot more terrifying than a swift animal attack. And finally, look at the anatomy of belief. If a bear attacks you, everyone believes you instantly. Nobody asks what you were wearing in the woods, if you had been drinking, or why you were walking alone. Nobody tries to defend the bear by saying it was a really nice guy who had a bright future. The real structural takeaway from the bear metaphor is that femicide doesn't happen out of nowhere. It follows a predictable, psychological escalation model that almost always follows these 6 distinct behavioral stages. Stage 1 is idealization. In psychology, we see this as extreme love-bombing, fast emotional attachment, and an intense possessiveness that easily gets mistaken for deep passion. Stage 2 is control. The isolation starts. The extreme jealousy, the phone checking, and the subtle emotional manipulation begin to creep in to undermine her confidence. Stage 3 is dependency, cutting off her financial freedom or exhausting her emotionally until she feels completely dependent on him and trapped. Stage 4 is escalating violence, actual physical assaults, explicit threats, stalking, and highly lethal warning signs like non-fatal strangulation, which forensic data shows increases her chances of being killed later by over 700%. Stage 5 is the trigger event, the psychological breaking point. Usually, this is when she finally tries to end the relationship, causing a massive catastrophic blow to his fragile ego. And stage 6 is lethal violence, the final, tragic step where he ends her life to make sure his control becomes permanent. As an educational takeaway, we have to realize that we must stop just reacting after a tragedy has already happened. If we want to bring these numbers down, public safety policies have to pivot based on criminological insights. We need to aggressively disrupt the behaviors before they turn physical. The red flags are never invisible. They are written in frantic text messages, logged in police reports that got filed away, and seen every day by medical professionals in our clinics. The tragedy of the femicide crisis isn't that we don't see it coming. It's that our systems stay completely silent when they should be screaming. It is time to break that institutional silence. Thank you for tuning into this educational deep dive on crime stories with Yvonne. Please stay safe, stay curious, look out for one another, and I will see you in the next episode.